Okay, welcome to the digestive system overview. This is a picture that my nephew drew of the digestive system, obviously. You can see the stomach here with all the food contents, and for like a 5-year-old he knew quite a bit. For example, he knew there was a tube that carried food to the stomach called the esophagus. I think he might have even knew that somehow. And then from the stomach it goes to the small intestine and then the large intestine. The small intestine is a little bit small here, but he continues it down here, and that's where he went wrong a little. But he does show a joining of a small and large intestine. So normally the small intestine is small in diameter, but it's actually really long, much longer than the large intestine. But he does show the ascending colon, the transverse, and the descending colon. When I asked what this was, he said it was his peepers. So he's a little bit confused because food and drink goes in one way, but they don't really come out the same way. At some point, the fluids in our body go through our blood and get filtered out by our kidneys, and come out our urinary system instead. But thought this was pretty helpful. Hopefully, by the end of this, you'll have a little bit more clear drawing of your own of the digestive system. So here's some of the organs that are involved in the digestive system. We have salivary glands that begin digestion, your esophagus that breaks through the diaphragm or your breathing muscle, which is totally unrelated to digestion. However, sometimes when the stomach bulges through this opening here, that's when you have a hernia. And your stomach goes to your small intestine that winds and winds and winds and meets your large intestine, which ascends, transverses, descends, and the sigmoid colon leads into your rectum, and you remove your feces through your anus, obviously. Your pancreas's main role is in creating or secreting digestive enzymes. Your liver's main role is to make bile that then gets stored here in the gallbladder, and they dump those contents into the small intestine. So you know that bile, whatever it's used for, cannot happen until your small intestine. So we'll get into the details of this in just a sec. This is just another diagram showing a lot of those same functions. You can pause it here if you kind of want to review it before we go deeper. But maybe you saw a demo about how chemical digestion actually begins in the mouth. There's actual physical digestion that's the main function of the mouth, which is breaking down food mechanically into smaller pieces. You're not chemically altering the lipids or the carbohydrates or proteins. So the whole point of mechanically breaking down food is to increase the surface area for chemical digestion. However, you do have one form of chemical digestion that happens in the mouth, and that is the breakdown of starch into glucose. And so if you hang on to a cracker long enough, you'll notice that it actually starts to taste sweet after a while. And that's because salivary amylase breaks it down. This is really the only chemical digestion that occurs in the mouth, and it's very little. But it makes sense that since carbohydrates are our main source of energy, it would make sense to have that start as soon as possible. So the entire digestive tract is referred to as the alimentary canal, or the gastrointestinal tract, your GI tract, and it has some common structures. The most important thing is that it has muscle that helps to move your food along. We call this type of muscle smooth muscle. It's involuntary, meaning you don't consciously control it, but it contracts to move food throughout your day. There's also a mucus layer lining the inside, which helps to reduce friction, helps the food slide along without like tearing up your digestive tract. And if you've ever heard of like a peptic ulcer in your stomach, that's when that mucus layer is broken down, and so you actually can develop like almost like a cold sore or a canker sore in your stomach, which is pretty painful apparently. So here's just a picture showing that those layers of the stomach. Oops. This is showing the folds. We can tell this is the small intestine because it has these little hair-like projections called villi. This is to increase surface area because all the food has to pass over this tiny little line here, this lining of cells. And so this is your mucus layer. And these are the layers of muscle that help to move. You have to actually have two layers because one squeezes one direction and one squeezes another direction. So in your stomach, there are 3 types of cells that secrete 3 different substances. Mucus is secreted to protect the lining of the stomach, and then pepsin is the main enzyme for protein digestion because protein digestion actually begins in the stomach. Pepsin is also called protease or proteinase, and HCl is what you might think of, hydrochloric acid. Everybody thinks of the hydrochloric acid in the stomach and glamorizes its role in breaking down food. However, the main role of hydrochloric acid is to create an acidic environment that activates the pepsin, because the pepsin is an enzyme that prefers a specific pH. And so it's not really hydrochloric acid that's doing all of the work. So this is just a picture showing the pits in the stomach. The different cells secreting those different substances are located throughout, but we won't get into that too much. Alright, so here's a picture of your stomach with your pancreas behind, and its interaction with like the liver and gallbladder and small intestine, which we're going to talk about now. So once food leaves your stomach, it goes to the small intestine, and as I mentioned before, it feels velvety because of the villi or finger-like extensions. And if you look closely, this is one villi here, but lining the entire villi are cells, and each, you can see a little fuzzy layer there, each of those cells has these microvilli, which you've learned about before. So there's a massive increase of surface area for absorption. So the main purpose of the small intestine, because of its features or characteristics, is absorption of nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. There's a continual breakdown of proteins and carbohydrates that occurs here because they didn't all get digested in the stomach. And this is the first time we're dealing with fats. Lipids get emulsified, which means that they're broken into small physical pieces. They're not chemically altered, so your triglycerides are still intact. And bile, that's the role of bile. It basically breaks it up into small chunks. Why do we need it in small chunks? Well, the enzymes that break down lipids chemically can only work on one side, so you break it down so that they have more access to the surface area. So the bile gets stored in the gallbladder, as we mentioned before. Lipase, notice all these enzymes end in ase, and so usually they're named for what they're involved in. So lipase breaks down lipids into glycerol and fatty acids. Alright, so this is just showing the connection with the bloodstream, because we know from our previous experience that food has to go through the small intestine and then into the blood. So that's why, remember, all of our food had to be in building block form before it could cross the lining of the intestine and move into the blood. This is just another picture showing that, which we've seen already. So your pancreas, what's its role? Well, as we said before, it secretes other enzymes to aid in digestion. Now you may think, wait, we've already had amylase. We had amylase in the mouth. Why do we need amylase again? Well, food has been through the stomach and the pH has changed, and so now we need a new enzyme that has a more optimal pH that it works at. So the pancreatic amylase is a little bit different than salivary amylase. But we also have lipase and protease coming from the pancreas as well. And some of the other juices secreted by the pancreas help to neutralize the acid contents of the stomach, because you would not want your entire feces and stool to come out being as acidic as your stomach, or that'd be quite painful. Alright, your large intestine, it does not feel the same as the small intestine when you touch it on the inside lining, because there are no villi. It doesn't have very much of a role in absorption of nutrients. However, its main job is to form and store your feces. There's some absorption that occurs here. It's mostly of water and electrolytes, and bacteria living in your digestive system help to break down the cellulose that we can't digest, and they synthesize vitamins. So this is kind of our major source of vitamin B12 and vitamin K. You can see why, if you have severe diarrhea, you're going to need to drink electrolytes, because you're losing a lot of electrolytes through your large intestine. Large intestine is also called the colon. That's why you see ascending colon, colon, transverse colon. And maybe you've heard of a colonoscopy. That would be, as people age, they go in with a microscope and look through the colon, because it's very easy to be diseased in this day and age, especially with our American diets. Alright, liver has a ton of functions. I'm just going to list a few here that kind of overlap things we've talked about. So we've already mentioned the role of creating bile. We've talked before about how it's a major storage area for glycogen, even though we don't store that much glycogen in our body. It oxidizes fatty acids, meaning when the fatty acids are broken down, they are technically an acid, and when you combine with oxygen, that can reduce the acidity of that. And it breaks down amino acids to form urea. So here's what's kind of cool, is your body can't actually store excess proteins. We take what we need to build new parts of cells, and then the rest we have to secrete. Now, because proteins are nitrogen containing, they have to get broken down a little differently. And so this is where the urea in our urine comes from. Because urea, or urea is a nitrogen containing compound, and that nitrogen is coming from proteins. It also plays a role in making lipoproteins for, say, the cell membrane, or phospholipids for the cell membrane, and cholesterol. And you probably know of it as storing iron and vitamins, which is why sometimes parents try to get their kids to eat it. I don't blame you if you don't want to. And maybe in your health classes you've talked about it being a major detoxifying organ. So after your digestive system absorbs the food into the blood in the small intestine, you do carry it to the liver where it can kind of detox before traveling on to the rest of the body. So this is your digestive system in a nutshell. Hope you enjoyed the PowerPoint, and hopefully we'll get to see these in a real organism.